West Townshend is a rural area on the east side of Glastonbury Mountain in the American state of Vermont. This is significant because that places West Townshend in the so-called Bennington Triangle, which is apparently one of the most haunted places in America. The Triangle is a loosely defined area that encompasses the ghost town Glastonbury, which used to be a small logging community centered on the eponymous mountain in southwestern Vermont. The town was abandoned at the end of the 19th century after the logging boom died down, so as a result, the greater Glastonbury area that West Townshend is certainly a part of is now untouched, pristine wilderness that even by Vermont standards is incredibly rugged and remote. The Triangle has earned its spooky reputation due in large part to the alarming number of unexplained disappearances that have occurred there over the last 100 years. Furthermore, over those 100 years, there have been dozens of sightings of the so-called Bennington monster, which is apparently this 8-foot-tall creature that roams the mountains of Glastonbury, and some people think that creature is behind many, if not all, of these strange disappearances. On November 23, 1943, 37-year-old Carl Herrick and his cousin Henry decided to go to West Townshend to do some deer hunting. At some point during their hunt, the pair got separated, and Henry spent some time yelling for Carl and looking around for him, but he couldn't find him, and so he assumed he must have gone back to their camp. But when Henry got back to camp, it was empty, and Henry waited around for a little while for Carl, but he had this sinking feeling that something was wrong, and so relatively quickly, he left to get police. Police show up, they launch this search. For 3 days, they combed the entire area, and there was just not a sign of Carl anywhere. On the third day, Henry discovered Carl's body. He was lying motionless, face down in a clearing in the woods. Initially, Henry thought maybe he was still alive, so he ran over to him and rolled him over, and very quickly realized that no, Carl was deceased. However, there weren't any obvious injuries to Carl's body. He had some minor scratching on his arms and on his hands, but that was about it. Henry looked around the area and he found Carl's rifle that was loaded leaning up against a tree 70 feet away from where Carl was. Next to his rifle on the ground was an expended shell casing. Also, around Carl's body were apparently huge bear tracks. The official cause of death was baffling. Carl apparently was squeezed to death to the point where his rib broke and punctured his lung. So the theory became Carl must have been out here by himself. He encountered a black bear. He fired one shot at the black bear. Thinking it was down, he walked over to check, and the bear attacked him and squeezed him and killed him. The end. But not so fast. If Carl encountered a black bear and fired one shot into the animal based on the one found shell casing, that one shot is not going to be enough to put that animal down. Or very rarely is one shot going to be enough to put down a black bear. And Carl, being a hunter, he would know that. And he would want to keep some distance with his weapon up aimed at the animal in case he needed to fire again. But even if Carl was really confident that one shot had taken the bear down, well, why would he risk his life by checking on the animal to make sure it's down without his gun? Why did he place it against a tree and then walk 70 feet over to this animal that if it's not dead, it poses an enormous threat to you? You're all alone and unarmed with a huge bear that you've shot. No one's going to do that. You're going to carry your gun. But even if all of that happened, that Carl, unarmed, approached this bear thinking it was dead, but the bear's not dead, he's lying in wait and he leaps up and attacks Carl. Even if that happened, black bears don't squeeze people to death. They might scratch you and bite you and rip you to pieces, but they don't squeeze you to death. And Carl only had light scratching on his wrists and on his hands. He did not have any signs of a traditional bear attack. So either this is the first time in the history of black bears that a black bear squeezed a person to death, or something else squeezed Carl. But what kind of an animal is, one, so strong it can squeeze a man's chest to the point where it breaks his ribs, and two, happens to be roaming around the Bennington Triangle? Makes you wonder. Ape Canyon is a gorge on the southeast portion of Mount St. Helens in the American state of Washington. The canyon is so named after a group of miners alleged that ape men, aka Bigfoot, attacked their cabin there in 1924. And if you want to learn more about that specific event, I covered it on my YouTube channel in an earlier video. It's right here. It's called Scariest Bigfoot Attacks, and I'll also include a link in the description. And while some people believe there are literally ape men running around this gorge on Mount St. Helens, there's never been a confirmed sighting. However, there was an event in 1950 that forced the general public to come to terms with the idea that there could be ape men running around Ape Canyon, or at least a large predator somewhere out there. In 1950, 32-year-old Jim Carter was a member of the National Ski Patrol at a ski area called the Milwaukee Bowl, which is in the state of Washington. Like everybody else on the ski patrol, Jim was a highly skilled skier and mountaineer. In May of that year, Jim was a part of a 20-person climbing party from Seattle, Washington. Their plan was to go to Mount St. Helens, hike up above the tree line, pick a spot, and then ski back down again. So the group arrives at Mount St. Helens, they hike up the mountain, they reach the spot where they want to ski down from, they sit down, they're putting their skis on, and Jim puts his on, and he says to the group, hey, why don't I ski down a little ways? I'll set up my camera on a tripod, and I'll take a picture of you guys as you pass, and then I'll follow you down to the bottom. And the group said, great, that sounds awesome. And Jim wanted to use his camera, so it was a win-win. So Jim, in full view of the entire group as they're getting ready, he skis down a little ways and then turns left into an area called Dog's Head, which was a little bit flatter than the area they were in, so probably a better spot to set up his tripod. But as soon as he turned left into that area, he was out of view of the main group. So after a few minutes, as the group is getting their stuff on, they took a little bit longer because they're trying to time it so they all leave at the same time because they want to get this picture all at once. And so they take a little bit extra time, they're all ready, and then finally they head down and they make that left. They're going to pass by Dog's Head specifically so Jim can take their picture. But when they bank around the corner, Jim's not there. And so they're looking around and they're saying to each other, did he tell us he was going somewhere else? Because it seemed an awful lot like he was going to Dog's Head, but obviously he's not here. And so someone said, well, maybe he got annoyed with us because we were taking so long to get ready up there and he just already went to the bottom. And so they agreed that's what he did. And so they got back together again and they headed down to the bottom. But when they got to the bottom, Jim wasn't there. And so they sat there for a few extra minutes looking up at the mountain, and they're kind of scanning down at the bottom and they're looking all over the place, but there's no sign of Jim. And so the group started to get really worried and they contacted authorities. When the first search team arrived, they went up to the area where the group thought Jim had been setting up at Dog's Head. And as they were looking around, all they could find was this discarded film box. So not any film or camera inside, just a box that would have held the film. It was kind of buried in the snow. Near this film box, they found Jim Carter's ski tracks, and they were not angled south towards the bottom of the mountain where the whole ski group had gone. They were angled east towards Ape Canyon. And they followed Jim's tracks, and they said they never deviated. They were total straight lines, like he was not trying to slow down. In fact, he was trying to go as fast as he possibly could. And at some point, he began leaping over these huge ice crevasses that if you mistimed, it's a death sentence. You're going into the crevasse. And he didn't just jump over one, he jumped over 2, 3, 4 at full speed without slowing down. And then his tracks got all the way to the edge where it overlooked Ape Canyon, and he went flying off. When the head of the search team saw this crazy ski line from Jim Carter, he said to the media that the only reason a guy like Jim, an expert skier who would never take risks like this, the only reason he would be skiing like this is if his life was in danger or if he was being pursued. So the search teams moved down into Ape Canyon, and for 5 days, 75 people combed the entirety of Ape Canyon up and back over and over and over again. They never found Jim, and they never found his skis or his camera or anything. And the whole time they were looking, those 75 searchers would report that anytime they were alone, they had the distinct feeling they were being watched. And it got so uncomfortable for many of them that they refused to go back into the gorge unless they had someone right next to them. After those 5 days of searching almost exclusively inside of Ape Canyon, they spent another 5 days not only continuing to search Ape Canyon, but also the surrounding areas. And finally, after 10 days of finding no trace of Jim Carter, the search was terminated. The only rational thing investigators could point to as the reason behind why this happened to Jim was he was diabetic and he had forgotten his insulin that day, so perhaps he became hypoglycemic and he became confused and then managed to ski off the cliff into Ape Canyon, where he landed in such a way that he remained hidden. Or, like the head of the search party seems to think, he was being pursued. He was skiing for his life. Whatever was chasing him had scared him so badly that he was skiing in a straight line down a cliff, jumping over ice crevasses before falling into Ape Canyon. And then presumably whatever forced him off the edge went down and scooped him up and took him away, and that's why they couldn't find him. But unless someone finds his body or finds some other piece of compelling evidence, we will probably never know for sure what happened to Jim Carter. Somewhere out in the Sierra Nevada mountain range lies a small hunting camp that's been there since the 1950s. Despite its fame, only a handful of people know exactly where this camp is. But even if you were given explicit directions on how to get there, you might just walk past it because it's tucked away in the middle of the woods up on this mountain. It's just a small fire pit, a couple of logs around it, another log set up for cutting wood, and there's some paths that have been beaten down over the years from its occupants, but it's pretty much unremarkable. According to camp members, the fastest way to get to the site is by horseback, and it's approximately 8 miles, and it's through very rugged terrain on this mountain, and it includes a 4,000-foot elevation gain. However, this 8-mile trail is not marked, and every year it changes slightly because trees will fall along the way, changing the topography. Ron Moorhead, who's one of the 4 original camp members, laments the fact that anybody knows anything about this campsite. He wishes they could have kept it a secret, but he knew that wasn't an option after what they discovered there in late 1971. In early 1971, Ron was a young man and he was invited out for the first time to the Sierra camp by the 3 founding members. When Ron got there, he fell in love. It was this beautiful, natural, pristine wilderness that overlooked this amazing valley, and they're surrounded by these huge white fir trees. There's a freshwater stream that trickled by, and in terms of hunting, the deer were plentiful. Ron said this campsite was the closest to heaven he thinks he'll ever get. The only real drawback of the site was the large bear population, but they always had guns on them, and they built this shelter out of heavy fallen timbers that they could go inside, shut the door, and they'd be protected from the bears until they left. When there wasn't a bear threat, they slept on the ground in tents. In late 1971, Ron came back to the camp with the other 3 founding members. They'd had a great day of hunting, and they were standing around the campfire just chatting with each other when they started hearing a grunting sound not far away from them in the forest. Now, typically, whenever a bear came to their campsite, it was usually at night, and they would hear it grunting somewhere off in the forest. And as soon as they heard it, they would stop and they would listen to kind of confirm it was a bear. And if it was, they would go inside of their shelter and they would wait for it to leave. But this time, when they stopped to listen to confirm it was a bear, the sound they heard next was something they had never heard before. And it was so frightening, they almost fell over each other running to get inside of the shelter. It was like a whooping sound you would expect from an ape, except instead of a series of whoops like you would expect from an ape, it was one loud whoop, and then silence, and then another creature somewhere else made a responding whoop that sounded different than the first. There was at least 2 creatures that were basically speaking to each other out in the forest, out of view. Ron would say, as these creatures were howling and whooping at each other out in the forest, the men were huddled around inside of the shelter looking at each other like, what is that? Has anybody heard that sound before? And nobody knew what it was. And after a little while, they heard these creatures running towards the camp. They were pretty well off, but they heard these heavy footsteps approaching. And so Ron and the others, they put themselves up against these slats inside of the shelter where they could look out in the direction where these creatures were, and they're staring out just past the light of their campfire into the dark forest, and they hear these things running, and they stop. They don't come into the clearing. It's like they're just outside of where they could see, and then their tone completely changes. These creatures, which are now one on one side of the camp and one on the other, begin speaking to each other in a language that almost sounds human, but it was nonsensical. It sounded like an imitation of a human language, but not human. And so Ron and the others are terrified, and they're just staring through the slats, waiting to see this creature that's going to emerge at some point, but it never does. Instead, the creatures continue to stay outside of the light, and they move around behind their shelter out of view. And so Ron and the others move to the very middle of their shelter to get as far away from the walls as they can, because there are breaks in the walls, and they're worried one of these things is going to reach through and grab them. But finally, after hours of these creatures running around the perimeter of their camp, communicating in this totally otherworldly language, they started whooping again and ran off. And for the rest of the night, Ron and the other 3 stayed right in that shelter. The next day, when the sun came up, the men were out of that camp as fast as they could. These are hard, rugged men, and they were very shaken up by this experience. And they tried to talk about it, but there was just no way to describe what they were hearing and experiencing. And so they just decided they just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible, and they'll deal with this later. But as soon as they got out of the woods and back to their homes, they didn't talk about it anymore, except Ron became obsessed with whatever it was that was making that sound. He so desperately wanted to find out what it was. And so he convinced the other 3 members to come with him and go back to the campsite, except this time Ron was going to bring an audio recorder and he was going to try to capture some audio of these creatures. And so the 4 men went back to the campsite. They didn't even hunt that day. They stayed right near the campsite. They made this big fire and they're all just kind of nervously sitting there waiting, kind of hoping it happens and also hoping it doesn't happen. And at some point in the evening, Ron said he heard footsteps way out in the middle of the forest and they sounded like they were running towards the camp. The 4 men sprint inside the shelter, lock it behind them, and Ron turns on the audio recorder. Now, before you listen to this famous recording, here are its bona fides. After being recorded, Ron sent it to Dr. R. Lynn Curlin, who is a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Wyoming, and he and his team analyzed it, and they concluded that 1, it was unaltered, so it's not been edited, it's not been doctored in any way, it's an authentic audio recording. And 2, whatever was making the sounds could not have been a man, because their vocal range was dramatically higher and lower than that of a human's. The doctor said, based on average pitch and tract length, the creature that was making the sound most likely was between 7'3" and 8 feet tall. In addition to the Dr. Curlin examination, a cryptolinguist expert named Scott Nelson also pointed out that it would have been nearly impossible in 1971 for Ron or any of the other hunters to dub the sound of their voices, which are on the recording, over the sounds that these creatures were making, because a couple times in the recording you hear both sets of voices happening at once. That's something you couldn't have done in 1971. Despite numerous attempts to debunk this recording, it still stands as a legitimate, unedited recording, although what they were recording is still a mystery. Have a listen.
There's 2 of them across the creek at the big rocks. It's a hard act to follow.
It sounds like he talks to us and they talk to each other.
Yeah. Right there, I just seen movement right through there.
Shortly after this recording was made, Ron stopped hunting at this camp. However, over the years, he has gone back several times because he's obsessed with trying to find out what's out in the forest. But he says to this day, he still has no idea. 2005, Eric Martin was working at a paper mill in Maine, and he had been working at this paper mill for 20 years, and he was reaching up to get something on a shelf when he threw his back out. And in fact, he had slipped a number of discs, and it ultimately meant he was not able to work anymore. He was going to be disabled. And so he's suddenly out of work. His wife, Shelly Martin, was not working at the time, but when he couldn't work, she needed to get a job. And so Shelly, who had not worked in a long time, was able, through some connections, to land a job in her hometown in Maine called Palmyra. Palmyra was a very small, rural community. I mean, we're talking maybe 1,200 people that lived there. They also had a 17-year-old daughter named Chelsea who was not eager to go, but it was the only place they could afford, and so they had to go. Luckily, because Palmyra was such a cheap place to live relative to where they had been living, that for less money, they actually ended up getting a bigger piece of property than they had lived in before. It's this beautiful farmhouse that sat on a whole bunch of acreage, but it was incredibly isolated. You had to go down this bumpy access road to get to their long driveway, and then once you were on the property, you'd look out and it was just a full 360 degrees of very dense forest that virtually no one was in. There was no nature trails. It was just dark, dense forest everywhere you looked. So even though no one's that happy about it, they end up moving into this farmhouse, and as they're unpacking their truck, Eric picks up one of his many rifles that he owned. Eric came from a long line of hunters. He loved to hunt. It was his favorite thing to do, and he had a whole bunch of guns that he kept. And as he's carrying the rifle into the house, Shelley says, oh no, we're not keeping the guns in the house. You have a barn, you're gonna put your guns in there. This had always been a point of contention for them in their marriage. Shelley just didn't feel safe having guns in the house, especially having kids in there. And so ultimately Eric agrees, okay, fine, I won't put my guns in the house. I'll put them in the barn. And so he went in the barn, and he and his son, Sean, who he had come out to help him, they built this gun case for all of his rifles. It was very heavy duty. They put it in the barn, and then they locked that and then locked the barn itself. So they were totally secure in the barn, but definitely not readily accessible. Over that first year, Shelley and Eric developed this ritual where at the end of the day, they would go out on the front porch of their farmhouse and look out onto the front yard, and they would drink coffee. It was something they both looked forward to, and virtually every night they did this. And so almost exactly a year after moving in, it was in early 2006, Shelley and Eric are sitting on their front porch, enjoying their coffee, they're chatting, and Shelley thinks she sees something in the woods. Now, you have to understand the layout and how far away they are from the woods to get a sense of what they were seeing. Right in front of their porch was a gravel road where they parked their cars. About 20 meters away from their house to the left is their barn, and beyond the barn, basically straight out from the porch, is this huge open field where there's no trees or anything. It was like open grazing area. And then way beyond the field was the beginning of this tree line, of this really dense forest. So we're talking at least a couple hundred meters away where she sees these lights. And she described it as like a pulsating light. It did not look like a car or some sort of vehicle, not to mention there was no road out straight ahead from their porch. It was just a dense forest where there was absolutely no one that should have been in there. Eric immediately, when he sees the lights, he thinks there's a poacher on his property, someone illegally hunting on his property. And so he gets Sean, his son, who did not live with them but was staying the night that night, he gets him to come outside and say, hey, do you think that's a poacher down there at the edge of our tree line? And Sean's like, I don't know, maybe. Eric decides that he wants to go tell this person to leave his property. And so he asked Sean to come with him. They figured they would just get to the edge of the property and yell out, hey, this is private property, you need to leave. As they're walking across the field and they're getting closer to the tree line, the lights, those pulsating lights, begin to fade and disappear back into the woods. And they get all the way up to the tree line and they can't see any lights at all. Even though at this point, standing on the edge of the forest, Eric and Sean are fairly confident that this poacher has left, they decide, just to be sure, let's walk a little ways into the woods. Even though it's totally dark, we're not going to get lost. We'll walk a little ways into the woods and just continue to yell, this is private property, so they really do leave. And so they begin walking, and it's a very dense forest, lots of low-hanging limbs. It's not somewhere that's easy to walk. There's no walking trails or anything like that. And they walk, 10, 15 meters into the woods, and then they hear what sounds like someone walking parallel to them, maybe 15 meters away from them on their left. And they both stop and they look. They didn't want to take any chance that they were being stalked by a predator. And so they thought, you know what? The lights are gone. I don't know what animal this is. Let's just get out of here. About a month goes by, and Nathan, who is Chelsea's boyfriend, was staying with the family at the farm. And it was the first nice spring day. I mean, it was a very dark and dreary winter. Maine winters tend to be that way. And so that weekend, Nathan and Chelsea decide, let's go walk around the woods. So they take the two family dogs and they start walking across that big field in front of the house into the forest, the same area where Sean and Eric have been looking for those lights and then heard what sounded like an animal that was near them. And so at first, Chelsea has the dogs on leashes, but they get to the forest and she lets them off their leash to let them go run around and go crazy because they've been cooped up because of the wintertime as well. The two dogs instantly take off running for about 100 meters, and then they come to a dead stop right outside this big mound. It looks like a dirt mound, but they get up close to it and they can tell that it's actually more like a den. There are these huge pieces of wood that have been leaned into like a lean-to type structure with moss and dirt and grass put all over the outside. I mean, it looks like a very intentionally made mound. And there's a circular hole that's been created right on the front of it. And the dogs have stopped right outside and they're poking their heads in and smelling into this hole. And Nathan and Chelsea are looking at this thinking, who did this? Is this like a hunter's thing? Is this something a hunter might make? Would an animal make this? This seems really big for some animal to make this, but it definitely was made on purpose, whatever it is. And so Nathan, he just kind of looks down into this den, but it's totally dark, and he thinks he hears growling coming from inside of the den. And so without any hesitation, he goes, we gotta go. I don't know what's living in there, but we gotta go. And so they take the dogs, they put them back on leashes, and the two of them get out of the forest as quickly as they can. When Nathan and Chelsea came back to the house, they told Eric and Shelly, and actually Sean was there too, and they said, hey, we found this den of some kind out in the middle of the woods, basically straight out from your front porch. And that's when Eric and Sean said, well, about a month ago, we were out in that same area, and we could have sworn we heard some animal stalking us. A couple of months go by, and Eric and Shelly are sitting on their front porch having their coffee ritual, and there was just this low mist that kind of hung over the entire field. And as they're sitting there, they're commenting on how creepy it was. And what started as just kind of a friendly discussion about the general creepiness took a turn when they realized that they couldn't hear any wildlife. No crickets, no animals, no anything. And normally at night, because they were out here all the time, it was humming with life. And so Shelly had this high-powered flashlight that she always had out with her, and she starts scanning the property, not knowing what she's looking for, but it just seemed really odd that they couldn't hear any wildlife. But after she scans across the whole field, she doesn't see anything, and so she puts her flashlight down and just starts talking to Eric about whatever they normally talked about over coffee at night. Eric would say in numerous interviews that for whatever reason, when she put that flashlight down, he suddenly felt like they were in danger. He's looking out, he doesn't see anything, and then all of a sudden he just says, you know what? We gotta go inside. I don't know what it is, but we gotta go inside. And Shelly's like, come on, I wanna stay out here for a little bit longer. We'll go in a few minutes. And Eric stands up and he's like, no, go inside. And he tries to grab her to kind of push her into the house. And she's kind of fighting against him. And then all of a sudden, Shelly stops. And she goes, did you hear that? And Eric immediately knew that whatever it was, it's the reason he had that sudden feeling of being in danger. Eric turns around and he can't see anything because it's too dark. Shelly grabs her flashlight and she begins scanning the tree line. And she gets to the field and gets about halfway across the field right in front of them, and she stops. Because right in the middle of the field are three creatures that look like wolves. These huge creatures that are looking right at them. Two others join them. So there's 5 wolf-like creatures that are staring at them right from the middle of their field. She says to Eric, what are those? And Eric, who's an experienced hunter, he has no idea. He goes, I think they're bears. They could be wolves. We gotta go inside. And so Shelly's just holding the light and they start charging directly at her so fast that she wasn't able to keep the light on them. They were already halfway across the field. They go inside, they shut the door, and they lock it. And without saying a word, the two of them make their rounds across the entire bottom floor, lock every window, close every blind, make sure everything is shut. There was something different about these 5 creatures. The way they started running towards them, it just felt like they were targeting Eric and Shelly. And so even after the house had been secured, they didn't feel safe. And so they're standing in the middle of their cabin, and Eric's saying, my guns are in the barn. We have no protection. And Shelly is like, whatever you do, do not go out there. We don't know what these are. It could be a bear, it could be a wolf, we don't know. Don't go out there. Shelly goes upstairs, she shuts off all the lights, she makes sure all the windows are shut. And then she goes to Chelsea's room, her daughter, and she wakes her up and she says, hey, come here, you gotta look at this. And they go to the window and they kind of like poke their head into the window because they don't want to like totally open it up and stare out because they don't want the creatures to see them. But they're kind of poking their head out the window and she's like, look. And standing on the gravel are these 5 creatures that are just standing in a row looking directly at the house. It was like they were waiting for them to come out the front door. They were just patiently standing there looking at the house. It did not look like normal animal behavior at all. And as she's looking, one of the animals looks up at Shelly in the window, and the creature stands on its 2 legs. It gets on its hind legs and looks at her, and Shelly gasps and falls over because the creature's like 8 feet tall. And so Shelly's on the ground looking at Chelsea, and she can't believe what she just saw. It's like her brain can't process that this creature, one, had even seen her. They barely had their head up in the window. But that it stood on its hind legs, that it was so big. What are they doing? Sitting in a row right on the outside of the house waiting for us? What's going on here? And so Shelly tells Chelsea, get in your bed, don't go to your windows, don't leave this room. And that's when Shelly also remembers that she hasn't heard her 2 dogs. And she's worried they might be outside. And so she starts quietly walking all along the top floor looking for her dogs. She's calling to her 2 dogs and they don't come out. Goes into the master bedroom and finds her 2 dogs hiding in the corner of the room next to each other. like they're startled by whatever it is outside. Meanwhile, Eric was pacing downstairs thinking he needed to go to the barn and he needed to get his guns to protect the family. But he knew that between his own disability, he can barely walk very fast, and he'd have to unlock the barn, and then he'd have to pull down the gun case, unlock that. All the while, he's exposed to these animals that are out there. And so the next best thing in his mind is maybe he could run outside, get in his truck, and back the truck up to the front door, and then he could get his wife and his daughter to come out, jump in the car, and they could drive away. So he just goes to the window and he pulls the blinds aside to look outside, and those 5 creatures are now gone. They're not sitting on the gravel path right in front of the house. He doesn't know where they are, but they're not in front of the house. And so he closes the blinds and he's like, well, I don't know where they are. It's too dangerous to go out there. He starts pacing some more and he goes back to look, and he sees them back in the field where they first saw them, all 5. He can see all 5. They're facing the house still, but he can see them because the moon has now popped through and he's got illumination on the field, and he can see all 5. And he's like, okay, maybe if I just keep my eye on them, I can open the door, run out, get the car, back it up without them seeing me. And so without telling Shelly, he opens the door and he goes onto the front porch and he sees them out in the field. He's got a good line of sight on them. Quiet as he can, he walks down the steps and he makes his way over to his truck, which is about 10 meters away. And as he's getting closer and closer to his truck, he's got his eye on the creatures that are in the field. They haven't moved. They apparently haven't seen him. He gets to the driver's side of his truck and he's got his keys out and he's kind of fumbling to hit the unlock button, and then his motion sensor light kicks on. And he's so on edge being out there, when the light kicks on, he drops his keys because he's so startled. And the first thing he does, he looks towards the field and he sees that one of the 5 creatures is now standing on its hind legs looking at him directly. Before he even bends down to get his keys, he sees them all running towards him. He reaches down, he grabs his keys, he runs back to the house as fast as he can, and he gets inside and slams it right as he can hear them crossing the gravel right in front of the house. And he hears them bound onto the porch and start running around the wraparound porch. He's too scared to even look in the window, so he ducks down to get out of view. Shelly, who was upstairs, can hear everything going on, and she yells, Eric, what's going on? And he goes, stay up there, stay up there. Shelly, Eric, Chelsea, everyone's just frozen, waiting, knowing that these creatures are right on the other side, walking along his wraparound porch. And after a while, he hears the footsteps of these creatures leave the porch and go back onto the gravel area. And at some point, he pokes his head up and he looks, and all 5 are sitting there just facing the house, waiting for them to come out of the house. And so he scurries up the stairs to where Shelly and Chelsea are, and they just are so scared. So they decide they gotta call the police. If nothing else, the police will drive up and their vehicle might scare away these creatures. But on the phone, Shelly lets on that what they're really scared about is something on their property. In fact, it's 5 creatures, things running around outside their property. And immediately the police officer who's responding to this, he's like, all right, well, are you sure it's not a moose? Are you sure it's not a bear? And finally she's like, no, can you please just come over here? And he's like, listen, ma'am, just keep your door shut, keep your windows shut, and I'm sure it'll be fine. And ultimately that's how the call ends. They're on their own. The family felt helpless, and Eric especially felt really frustrated because he can't protect his family. He doesn't have a weapon, he can't get to his vehicle, they're just trapped. And so they decide the only thing we can do is barricade ourselves inside of the house. And so for the next 30 minutes, they put heavy furniture in front of all the doors and the windows. They blocked everything as best as they could. They got kitchen knives and they got an axe that they had inside to chop some wood. And so they go upstairs, they lock themselves in the master bedroom with their weapons and their dogs. And they get on the bed and they just decide all we can do is wait until the sun comes up. During the time they were barricading their house, they would look out from time to time and they would see the 5 creatures just sitting on that gravel area right in front of their house, just waiting for them. When they finally went upstairs and barricaded themselves in that room, they immediately heard the creatures move off of the gravel, and they heard a couple of them at least walk onto the porch and start pacing around the porch. And it's totally silent besides the sounds of these creatures. And they were clearly communicating with each other. They were bumping into walls and then they were howling at each other. There was clear communication happening where they were trying to coordinate some sort of attack on the family. Now, the way the house was set up is there was a 2nd floor roof, and then the 1st floor was a little bit wider than the 2nd floor and had its own kind of separate roof. And after a while, the creatures stopped walking on the porch. They left the porch and it's just silence. And then they would hear them jump onto that 1st roof. The scary thing about this is that if you walked around the roof, you could actually look into the second floor windows. And so they're laying there, and periodically they'd be looking out their window. There was windows in either side of the room they were in, but there was a thin curtain between them and the window. And so from time to time, these creatures would walk past their windows, and they would stop, they'd put their paws up onto the window, and they would look inside. But there was a very thin sheet between them and the glass, so they couldn't see the creature, and the creature couldn't see them. All night they're listening to these creatures running around, and sometimes they'd hear really loud scratching, like they had figured something out and they were trying to burrow their way into the house. But after a whole night of this, they never actually broke the glass. They never got inside the house. As the sun started to come up in the morning, the creatures jumped off the roof and they could hear them running away. And for about an hour they didn't hear anything outside. The sun's come up and they felt safe again. And so they left their room, they go downstairs, and they finally open it up, and all over their property are signs of huge creatures that had been on their property. Massive footprints with huge claws at the end. They found tufts of hair that had gotten caught on fence posts. And even scarier is they found all these points on the house, in particular on the second floor when they were walking on that roof, where there was clear markings that they had tried to burrow into the house. There were these deep-seated scratch marks into the side of the house. The front door had been scratched apart. I mean, it was very clear that whatever these creatures were, they were trying to get into the house, but they had just been unsuccessful. This experience was so traumatic for the family that they sold the house and they moved very quickly after that, and they have not experienced anything like that since they left. So what do you think those creatures were? Was that a bear, a wolf, or something else? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will get back to all the early commenters. So get in there and give me your best theory. There is this tiny, lush, heavily forested, beautiful island 93 miles off the coast of Brazil that no matter how beautiful it looks, no one will go to this island. In fact, you're not allowed to go to it because the Brazilian Navy has forbid it. So the legend of this island really began in the early 1900s when a local fisherman was off the coast of the island and saw right on the edge of the forest were these beautiful banana trees with all these bananas that were ripe and ready to be picked. And he thought, I can easily pull my boat over to those rocks over there, hop out, grab some bananas and bring them home, no problem. That'll take me, 10 minutes to do. And so he pulls over by himself to get these bananas. He anchors his boat, he walks up the beach, he climbs up the tree and he starts hacking down some bananas. And while he's up there, he suddenly feels a sharp pain on his rib cage. And he falls out of the tree and he looks down and he's bleeding out of his rib cage because he can see it on his shirt. There's blood on his shirt. Was there a branch that jabbed me in the side? Like, what was that? And he's alone. He's 93 miles from the mainland. And so in a panic, he ditches the bananas, he runs to his boat, gets it unanchored, and starts making his way back to the mainland. But on the trek back, he passes out in the boat. Later that day, another group of fishermen see this boat kind of drifting around near some rocks, and it looks like something's wrong, so they make their way over to it, and there's this fisherman who went to get the bananas, but he's lying on his back. He's clearly dead, and he's in a pool of his own blood. 20 years after this incident, there was a lighthouse keeper that was assigned to work on this island, and he brought his family with him. They were staying in the main house of the lighthouse, and it was going fine for the first couple of days they were there. But at some point, captains of vessels that would drive past this island and relied on that lighthouse noticed that the light wasn't on. And so they reported it to the mainland, and a search party was sent out to check on the lighthouse keeper and his family to make sure that they had all their supplies and that they were okay. When they get to the lighthouse, they find the entire family is dead in their bed. And the only clue they had were these puncture marks all over the bodies of these deceased lighthouse keepers and an open window. So what killed these people that went to this island? Technically, they died from a poison that literally melts your organs within 60 minutes of coming in contact with it. But that poison comes from a very famous venomous snake called the golden lancehead viper that only exists on this island. They exist nowhere else in the world. And so this island has been dubbed Snake Island. And since nobody goes to this island, the lancehead viper population has exploded. They are thriving on this island. In fact, researchers say that there's at least 3,000 of these venomous snakes that live on this island, and for every 1 square meter of the island, there is a snake, which means if you're on this island, you are always within 1 meter of something that can kill you. And these snakes aren't just on the ground either, because their primary food source are birds, and so the snakes have begun to live in the trees and catch birds that land in the trees. Meaning, if you happen to be walking on this densely forested island, you'd be surrounded almost 360 degrees by these wickedly venomous snakes that if you are bit, you have 60 minutes to get the antidote. If you don't, you're doomed 100% of the time. Nowadays, the only people that go to this island are the Navy, who replace the batteries in the lighthouse, which is now automated because it's too dangerous to be there. They go once a year to replace those batteries. Researchers occasionally go there, and you have poachers that go to try to catch some of these snakes because they're so rare, they can sell on the black market for 10 to 30,000 US dollars. But many of these poachers that manage to sneak onto the island just get bit by these vipers and die. So there you go, karma. In early 1945, during World War II, the British decided they wanted to take back Ramree Island from the Japanese. Ramree Island is a fairly large, totally flat island off the coast of Burma that was a great staging location to fly air campaigns onto the mainland. So it was a great air base. And the British had actually owned this island, but the Japanese had taken it back from them in 1942. And so here they are in 1945 looking to take it back. So on January 21st, 1945, British and Indian infantry stormed the beaches of Ramree to try to take it back. As soon as they land, they have all this naval artillery support just bombing the crap out of this airbase, and it was just a matter of time before they overwhelmed the remaining Japanese. But the Japanese do not want to surrender, and instead they give up the airbase that they were on, so the British take that back, and the remaining 1,000 Japanese soldiers started retreating to the opposite end of the island, to where there was a much larger battalion of Japanese soldiers that they could meet up with. But the only issue with this particular retreat was they would have to go through 10 miles of mangrove swamp where there's poisonous spiders and insects and deep mud, making it almost impossible to move. But they're determined and they head off into the swamp. But what the Japanese were not ready for is what Ramree Island is famous for: a creature that makes poisonous snakes and spiders and insects look like child's play. And they were walking directly into its den. The British troops decided we're not going to go chasing them into the swamp. And instead what they did is they set up boats, blocking positions outside of the swamp. If any of the Japanese tried to escape, they would be there waiting. And so the only way the Japanese could get out of there would be to go to the absolute other end, 10 miles away, where their Japanese counterparts were. So that night, as the British are just kind of hanging out in their boats staring at the swamp, they start hearing screams coming from inside of this swamp, and it's Japanese soldiers. Then you hear gunfire and then silence. And then it would start all over again. All over this huge swamp was just screams, gunfire, silence. Screams, gunfire, silence. And the British are watching this like, do we have troops in there? What's going on in there? What was going on in there is defined by the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest massacre of humans caused by animals. And not just any animal, saltwater crocodiles. These massive man-eating crocodiles can weigh up to 1,000 kilograms or 2,200 pounds. They can grow to be 7 meters in length or about 23 feet in length. And National Geographic has labeled these crocodiles as the most likely to eat a human of all animals. And Ramree Island has the largest population of saltwater crocodiles in the world, and they all lived inside of the swamp that the Japanese had gone into. A lot of them were bleeding from the battle they were in, and so they were literally alerting hundreds of saltwater crocodiles to their location. Saltwater crocodiles are notorious night hunters. So what probably happened is the Japanese got inside of this mangrove. The crocodiles were immediately aware of their presence, but they waited until nighttime before they started having a feeding frenzy. And over the course of the night, a number of Japanese soldiers had jumped out the sides of the swamp, exposing themselves to the British. And so about 20 of them were captured, and they said that they were completely surrounded by these crocodiles, that everywhere you looked, there were growling, huge crocodiles eating one person, and as soon as they were done, they would just charge after you and eat you. And at the end of their retreat, when the Japanese did get to the other side of the swamp, only 500 of the 1,000 made it out the other side. And so to this day, people stay far away from Ramree Island because there are so many of these man-eating saltwater crocodiles that have no issue ripping you to shreds. On November 14th, 2018, John Chow hired 2 fishermen to take him out to this little island in the Indian Ocean. The fishermen were not excited about this, not only because it was illegal to take him out to the island, but because the last time some fishermen had gone to this island, they had both died. But the fishermen needed the money, and so they went with John and they drove under the cover of darkness to this island and they anchored a little ways offshore. The next morning when the sun came up, John asked the fishermen to take him in a little bit closer, but the fishermen refused. So John puts a kayak in the water and he begins paddling into this island. And as he gets close to the actual beach, he sees someone come out of the forest who has their face painted yellow and they're screeching at the top of their lungs. And John yells out that he's not threatening them, he just wants to come ashore and talk to them. And then a wave of people with yellow painted faces come charging out of the woodline and start firing arrows in his direction. So John, in a panic, turns around and paddles right back out to the fishing boat. Later that day, John tries to make another attempt at landing on this island and communicating with the people that live there. So he takes his kayak and he goes down a little bit farther away from where those people had emerged from the tree line earlier in the day and shot him with arrows. He figured he was a little bit farther out of arrow range this way. He lands his kayak, he gets out, and the same group of people come out farther down the beach where they had been before. They see John. They all start looking at each other and they start screeching and running down the beach towards John. John stands there until they come all the way up to him. They don't shoot him with arrows, but they take his kayak and they don't really know what to make of him. They're staring at him and they start speaking to each other in a language John doesn't understand. And then at some point, a child pulls his bow and arrow out and fires a bow directly at John. And he was holding a Bible and he stopped the arrow with his Bible. And at that point, John is like, okay, I gotta go. And he jumps in the water and without a kayak has to swim a mile to get back to the fishing boat. The whole time, these people are firing arrows arbitrarily in his direction as he's swimming back out to the boat. And so the next day, on November 16th, he told the fishermen he wanted them to drop him off and he would swim in and he wanted them to leave and be completely out of sight. The fishermen did not want to do this, but John reassured them that he was going to be just fine. He knew what he was doing. And so the fishermen drop him off and they leave. The next day when the fishermen come back to collect John, they see these people with painted yellow faces out on the beach dragging his body by a rope. No one knows exactly what happened to John, how they killed him. There's lots of speculation about how it went down, but it's too dangerous for anyone to go back and retrieve his body, and so his body remains at North Sentinel Island. The few hundred people that live on North Sentinel Island that were responsible for killing John Chow, they're referred to as the Sentinelese, and they are unbelievably primitive. They are completely cut off from the modern world. They live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They have no conception of agriculture. They haven't even discovered fire yet. They literally have to wait for lightning to strike and then run and collect the embers and try to keep the embers alive. Researchers believe that the Sentinelese are direct descendants from the earliest human ancestors that came out of Africa. And as much as we'd like to learn more about the Sentinelese, we probably won't, because they aggressively resist outside contact. They won't even let the other similarly primitive neighboring island tribes to come on their island. The Sentinelese want only Sentinelese on that island. No one else can be there. If you're not a Sentinelese and you try to go to their island, they'll just kill you. So let me know what you think of these 3 crazy locations, and let me know if you could go to any of these 3 locations, which one would it be and why? The best answer to that question will get pinned at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's story and you haven't done this already, please throw the like button into the Devil's Kettle in Minnesota, and then subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you have a story that you think I should cover on this channel, please submit it to our subreddit. It's linked in the description below. It's just called MrBallen. I read it every day, and if I intentionally use your submission, whether it's your personal story or just a suggested story, I will absolutely credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both those platforms is the same, JohnBallen416. I also post a ton of content on TikTok where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya.